Part 1.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hello, Edwina, is it? Have a seat.
Yes, Edwina. Thanks. I'm looking for a job as a nanny. I like working with children. I talked to you yesterday.
Oh, yes. Well, we covered most of the ground on the phone yesterday. I've got a form I need to complete for my records. So, you're Edwina Riley, and how should we contact you?
Oh, by email. I check it regularly.
What's the address?
It's Edwina, like my name, then R-I, the first 2 letters of my surname, at worldnet.com.
EDWINARI at worldnet.com?
Yes.
Good. And you're from Australia?
Actually, I'm a New Zealander.
Oh, I'm sorry. I bet it's really irritating being told you're an Australian. Like Canadians being asked what part of the States they're from.
I'm used to it. It happens to us all the time.
And now, you said on the phone that you could bring me some references. One from someone who's known you in a professional capacity and one personal one.
Oh, yeah. Here's one from John Keane, who was the manager at the Play Centre in Wellington, where I worked for 3 years after I left school. It's got all his contact details on.
Thank you. So, this was your last employer?
Yes, apart from a bit of waitressing recently, but that was just temporary. I'm sure John will answer any questions if you contact him.
We do run checks, yes. And a personal reference?
Oh, you can contact the friend of my mother's I'm staying with here in London, Eileen Dorsini. She's a professor. She's known me all my life because she used to be our neighbour back home when she was a primary school teacher there. Now she's working here at the Institute of Education.
Oh, good.
I've got her contact details here for you.
Thanks. I think I have some jobs to suit you. Oh, do you have any practical qualifications, by the way? Life-saving, music, anything?
I've got an up-to-date first aid certificate. I did a course when I was working.
That's good. First aid. Anything else?
Well, I've got a driving licence, as I told you on the phone, but that's not special, you said. Almost everyone needs that, really. I've got a sailing qualification. It's a certificate of competence.
So you're a yachtswoman?
I love sailing.
Well, I'll note you have a certificate.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, as I mentioned yesterday, there are 3 families, and the job description is much the same for all of them, as I explained. There are a few other things you need to know. Anyway, the first family is here in London.
Yes, I did make a few notes. London, that's the Bentons with 2 children?
Yes, that's right. A girl of 3 and her brother, who's 8. The little boy has a quite serious food allergy. Did you learn about things like that on your course?
Oh, well, I know what to do if someone has an allergic reaction.
Good. But what they mainly want is someone with an interest in sport, as, well, that's the kind of family they are.
Oh, that's okay. I'll enjoy that.
Good. Now, the next people are in the country near Oxford.
Oh, yeah, the Grangers?
Yeah, so they have twin boys of 5 who are a bit of a handful, I suspect. But it's a lovely place, quite a grand house, and the family is extremely welcoming. They keep horses. Do you ride?
I did when I was younger. I like animals generally.
Well, Animal Lover was their special request, so you'd be fine there. The last family...
Yes?
I don't think I told you. They live in Scotland.
Really? What's their name?
Campbell.
Oh, yes. And they have 4 girls under 10?
That's it. They have a lovely city flat, and they own a small island.
Wow!
Actually, you might get on with them very well. They particularly wanted someone who would be prepared to cook when they go camping on the island.
Camping would really suit me, and I'm used to taking my turn doing the food, but it is a long way from London.
Yeah, well, you can think about it. Then, as soon as I've checked your references, we can arrange for you to talk to all of the families.
Right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'll email you as soon as I can.
Here ends the Part 1. You have now 30 seconds to review your answers to Part 1. Part 2.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Good evening. I'm Geoffrey Miller from the University of Nottingham Student Union, and in this week's free class, Carlos Garcia is going to tell us about safety around campus. Over to you, Carlos.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you all for your attendance today. Also, I'd like to thank the Student Union here at the university for organising this lecture. Well, I've been serving and protecting the city of Nottingham for over 20 years now as a member of the police department. Does anyone know what type of crime is the most prevalent on campus? I heard someone say drugs and alcohol. That actually isn't too much of an issue. Violence? Nope. Actually, the biggest thing we worry about here is theft. The nature of crime on Nottingham's campus is quite different from that of the surrounding areas. Crime rates across the East Midlands are very difficult to control. We'd like to see the rate stay the same for this calendar year, but it has been increasing steadily over the past 3 years. On campus, however, I'm happy to say that the overall crime rate has fallen this year. You wouldn't think so if you've seen the extremely exaggerated stories in the media. The media has done nothing but cause more concern about crime in our area. Even the crime shows you see today are a little bit far-fetched, but at least viewers know they're not real events. We'd really like to see more factual news articles out there so the public can have a rational sense of the safety level of our society.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
OK, let's move on to what to do when you see a crime. Do not get involved if at all possible, and do not draw too much attention to yourself by running away in a conspicuous manner. Though most likely, and hopefully, you will not have to experience this situation, if you are being mugged, please do not try to resist. Instead, be compliant and seek help after the incident. Like I said, though, it is highly unlikely that you will find yourself amidst a crime, but it is important to be prepared should it ever happen. We find that educating students and staff on the correct precautions to take is the best way to increase your safety. Just remember to be smart when you're out late at night and avoid any area or person that looks suspicious. I know it sounds obvious, but I cannot stress this enough. It's also not a bad idea to have your mobile phone with you at all times, but be careful. If you're chatting on your smartphone on your way home, you're a prime target for thieves. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people have left work or the library after 10 p.m. to go home before? A lot of you, right? If you do have to go home late at night, please don't walk home alone. More often than not, there's someone there that will be walking the same direction as you at some point. Walk home with a friend or co-worker. Even if you must use your phone to call someone that's nearby to walk with you, it's always safer to walk home with someone. So when you're walking home, you may feel more comfortable with some sort of self-defense, such as pepper spray. Now, it's your call whether you want to carry something like this or not. However, I absolutely advise against carrying a knife or any other offensive weapon. All too often, they can be used against you if you're disarmed, putting yourself in more danger. For all those interested, the Recreation Centre offers a free self-defense class to all students every Thursday evening. While obviously an introductory self-defense class may not equip you to fight off villains like a regular superhero, it does come in handy sometimes. After taking a self-defense class, you'll surely be more aware of possible dangers and how to deal with them. So hopefully now you have a more complete understanding of the nature of crimes committed on your campus and how to avoid being a victim. I know most students at the University of Nottingham are not the criminal types, but remember that there is no barrier like a wall or something keeping non-students out. There's no army force securing the borders, and I doubt anyone wants it that way. The campus is generally a safe place, but it's not immune to small crimes once in a while. All right, that's all I have to say for today. Stay safe.
Here ends the part 2. You have now 30 seconds to review your answers to part 2. Part 3.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 23. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 23.
Hi, Bobby. Go ahead and sit down. Tell me about your research project.
Well, I decided to research football and keys for success on a football team.
That sounds great. What are the guidelines for the test? Did the teacher talk to you about it in class?
No, everything is on a handout that was passed out. It says that the first draft is due at the end of next week and the second and third are due later on in the month. I don't understand why we have to keep revising and fixing it. Is this assignment really that important?
Well, this project is a major requirement for passing 11th grade English and will go on your permanent record.
Oh, really? Does that mean it will affect what English level I am placed in next year?
Well, not exactly. You need a good grade to move on, but it is your overall grade and teacher recommendation that determines what level of English you are placed in next year. Anyway, tell me about your topic choice. Do you play football?
Well, actually, it's because my father loves the sport. He watches it every weekend.
Cool. It's a good idea to report on something you're interested in.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 24 to 30. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 24 to 30.
I see you worked hard calling players and the head coach to talk, so let's see what information you got.
Well, you have to listen carefully to the first call on the recording. It's really hard to hear because the background noise is louder than the person's voice.
Yes, it is a bit tough to discern. I'm afraid the player's answer is too short as well. You will have to interview him again and try to get him to give a better answer.
Okay, I thought that might happen. I will call him again tomorrow.
Moving on, let's look back at this question. You asked, tell me about a time when you learned a major life lesson through playing football and explain how that has shaped the person and player you have become now and how you hope to pass on that lesson. It is a great idea for a question, but in an oral interview it is far too complex. I would advise you to break it up into multiple parts to get a better response.
I guess you're right. I wouldn't want to have to provide an answer to a question like that. I will simplify it. I found that when I asked players this question, it took too much time because they were struggling to answer the question completely. In fact, this is the question Joe Billings was answering when the tape ran out.
He did tend to ramble on all the questions, didn't he?
He sure did.
I would recommend that when you go back and interview players again, that you use a more sophisticated recording device. This recording is spotty, which indicates that the equipment wasn't working consistently.
Okay, I guess it probably wasn't the best idea to use the sound recorder on my phone. Hey, could you give me some feedback on the content of the report itself?
Sure. Let's start by focusing on your topic. While I like that you chose to cover football, it seems inexplicit. The keys for success of a player and team is quite an interesting topic, but what is your thesis? That is to say, what conclusions can you draw from your research? I would suggest coming up with a strong thesis statement and then shaping your report based on that.
Is it really too vague? I put a whole lot of facts into it. I list the top 10 goal scorers in football history and later on provide statistics for a few of the most famous coaches and their records as coaches.
I think that's great that you included these facts, but I think you focus too much on the facts and not enough on connecting these facts to make your point.
Ah, I see. Okay. So it looks like I have quite a bit of work to do before the deadline.
Here ends the part 3. You have now 30 seconds to review your answers to part 3. Part 4.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I work for the National Weather Service, and as part of your course on weather patterns, I've been asked to talk to you about how we predict the weather. We're so used to switching on our TVs and getting an up-to-date weather forecast at any time of day or night that we probably forget that this level of sophistication has only been achieved in the last few decades, and weather forecasting is actually an ancient art. So I want to start by looking back into history. The earliest weather forecasts appeared in the 1500s in almanacs, which were lists of information produced every year. Their predictions relied heavily on making links between the weather and where the planets were in the sky on certain days. In addition, predictions were often based on information, like if the fourth night after a new moon was clear, good weather was expected to follow. But once basic weather instruments were invented, things slowly started to change. In the mid-15th century, a man called Nicholas Cusa, a German mathematician, designed a hygrometer which told people how much humidity there was in the air. To do this, Cusa put some sheep's wool on a set of scales and then monitored the change in the wool's weight according to the air conditions. A piece of equipment we all know and use is the thermometer. Changes in temperature couldn't really be measured until the Italian Galileo Galilei invented his thermometer in 1593. It wasn't like a modern-day thermometer because it had water inside it instead of mercury. In fact, it wasn't until 1714 that Gabriel Fahrenheit invented the first mercury thermometer. In 1643, another Italian, called Evangelista Torricelli, invented the first barometer, which measured atmospheric pressure. This was another big step forward in more accurate weather predicting. As time went on, during the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries, all these meteorological instruments were improved and developed, and people in different countries began to record measurements relating to their local weather. However, in those days it was very difficult to send records from one part of the world to another, so it wasn't possible for them to share their information until the electric telegraph became more widespread. This meant that weather observations could be sent on a regular basis to and from different countries. By the 1860s, therefore, weather forecasts were becoming more common and accurate because they were based on observations taken at the same time over a wide area. In 1863, France started publishing weather maps each day. This hadn't been done before, and other nations soon followed. So that was the start of national weather forecasting. And I'll now tell you how we at the National Weather Centre get the information we need to produce a forecast. Even today, one of the most important methods we use is observations, which tell us what the weather is doing right now. Observation reports are sent automatically from equipment at a number of weather stations in different parts of the country. They are nearly all based at airports, although a few are in urban centres. The equipment senses temperature, humidity, pressure, and wind speed direction. Meteorologists also rely really heavily on satellites, which send images to our computer screens. What we see on our screens is bright colours. Orange represents dry air, and bright blue shows moisture levels in the atmosphere. The satellites are located 22,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, and it's amazing that despite that distance, it's possible for us to make out an individual cloud and follow it as it moves across the landscape. In addition to collecting data from the ground, we need to know what's happening in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So a couple of times a day, from many sites across the country, we send radio sondes into the air. A radio sonde is a box containing a package of equipment, and it hangs from a balloon which is filled with gas. Data is transmitted back to the weather station. Finally, radar. This was first used over 150 years ago and still is. New advances are being made all the time, and it is one method for detecting and monitoring the progress of hurricanes. Crucial information is shown by different colours representing speed and direction. Radar is also used by aircraft, of course. All this information from different sources is put into computer models, which are like massive computer programs. Sometimes they all give us the same story, and sometimes we have to use our own experience to decide which is showing the most accurate forecast, which we then pass on to you. So, I hope next time you watch the weather forecast, you'll think about how we meteorologists spend our time. And maybe I've persuaded some of you to study meteorology in more depth.
The listening module of the test is over, and you now should write your responses to the answer sheet in 10 minutes.